אחרי הסרט אנחנו עוברים לחלק האחרון של הערב הארוך, המרתק, המעמיק הזה, לדיאלוג באנגלית. ינחה אותו פרופסור פול מנדס פלור, שכבר הצגתי אותו וכבר ראיתם אותו גם מדבר פה בסרט, פרופסור אמריטוס לפילוסופיה יהודית מהאוניברסיטה העברית, ולצידו השתתפו בדיאלוג דוקטור סרי נוסייבה, מוכר גם כן בציבור הישראלי, כיהן כנשיא המייסד של אוניברסיטת אל-קודס במזרח ירושלים, בוגר אוקספורד והרווארד בפילוסופיה איסלאמית, ופרופסור דוד שולמן, פרופסור ללימודי הודו באוניברסיטה העברית. אני מזמין את שלושתם, בבקשה.
It's been a long evening, so this part of the evening is in English. So you'll forgive us for violating the holiness of Hebrew or Arabic. I'm just apologizing that we're going to turn to English. Our speakers have already been briefly introduced, and since it's a long evening, I'm not going to say much more other than welcoming to us into this forum. The film presented ultimately a very optimistic sense that Buber is with us. Buber Chai, or there's a graffiti that some of you may have seen. Buber Tzadak, Buber was right, as opposed to Kahana. But if we face or confront the reality of Israel, the headlines, and there's much reason to be somewhat more despondent than the film suggests. So the question I'd like to discuss with Sari, who's to my left, and to David, to my right. That's not a political expression, it's just simply maybe, no. I hope not. Whether there is still corridors of hope, possibilities of pursuing dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. Are there still channels in which we still can explore with the hope of paving a way to a just and honorable solution to our conflict? So I'd like to first ask David, if you wish, to address that question.
I was hoping you would ask Sari first.
Oh,
okay. Actually, first you mentioned hope, maybe before you mentioned the channels of communication. So I, just for the record, want to say I think there's always hope. Hope is different than being optimistic, for example. And optimism is a kind of shallow mental attitude. Hope is a kind of spiritual act of some sort, actually. Sometimes the worse things get, the more hope you have. So I certainly haven't lost hope. But in terms of the channels of communication, let me try to answer that. I think we live with the feeling that there's not very much communication, that a kind of curtain has fallen. But I have a feeling that this feeling, which I think is shared by many people here, is not really true. That is, it doesn't correspond to the reality that I see. It's true that I inhabit a kind of unrepresentative kind of space, in the sense that I'm very often in the Palestinian territories, especially in South Hebron, and so I'm in contact with Palestinians all the time, and I'm not alone there. And there, if you look at the peace groups, we're not talking about a vast proportion of the population, but nonetheless, there are channels that are very active channels. There's the, the Forum of the Bereaved Families, which is amazingly effective. Just 2 weeks ago in Tel Aviv, there was the joint memorial service. Thousands of people came to that, and I wasn't there, but I saw some of it afterwards on the computer. There were amazing things that were said. There was a Palestinian woman, Yasmin from Nablus, who spoke in a way that actually brought me to tears. And the fact that thousands of people came to that ceremony, it's not a trivial thing. It also is not necessarily a function of statistics, you know. Sometimes the small numbers of people can make a change. But aside from that, that's my own particular piece of this world. I think that the feeling that we have comes from two main reasons. One is that, first of all, the public space, the public sphere has been polluted by the kind of things that politicians say and that we hear all the time. That creates despair. And also creates the feeling that there's no dialogue. It's a kind of inward-looking kind of space. But aside from that, there's a kind of willful deafness or blindness, which is much worse probably than real deafness and real blindness. I have it in my own family. I have a cousin. He happens to live in Canada, but you know, this is a person. He's a cousin of mine. He believes in a deep way that no Palestinian has ever said anything even remotely approximating some kind of, you know, moderate, peaceful stance in the world. And no matter how many times I send him the kinds of things that are available in the press, actually beginning with Abu Mazen and on the way down, it has no impact on him because he's willfully blind and needs to be blind and deaf. And I think that's the kind of feeling that we you know, I mean, when we say that there's no communication, that's the kind of thing that feeds that feeling. There are also other channels. I mean, I don't want to go on about this, but I mean, it seems to me, you know, in our world at the university, it's extremely common that our friends and colleagues have close Palestinian friends, visit Palestinian families. There's quite a lot of interaction, also interaction in various places in the world. And there are other subterranean channels, which I think maybe I won't talk about now, but maybe we'll come back to that if there's time later.
Sorry, do you have anything to say to his cousin?
Not if his cousin is deaf, I'm afraid. Let me just say one or two words about optimism and hope, if I may. And I just want to say that at one point, maybe now also, but I'm not sure, I thought both optimism and hope were very negative or neutral attitudes, especially when they related to something important like peace. And I thought, I used to think, I'm not sure if I still think, that what really is needed for, as an attitude to bring about peace is more something like faith. You have to have faith. So the question I ask myself is whether Palestinians, Israelis, really do have faith in future life, together, in life after the conflict, so to speak. And at one stage, I thought that that was the secret key to bringing about peace, that one has to create that faith on the part of the people concerned, and that the people can bring it about. But to tell you the truth, I've been despondent over the past few years, and it's not because I'm naturally a depressive kind of person. It's because, contrary to what we just heard David just say, I feel that there's been a kind of decline in the communication channels between Israelis and Palestinians, and especially, for instance, at the level of academics and universities. Now, I know that this is not total, it's not been total, and there is some communication. But if you compare between, say, the period just before and just after Oslo and today, I think you'll find there's almost a kind of, what do you call it, a major fall, crash into the lower abyss. And on my side, for instance, a lot of my colleagues at the universities Palestinian universities have a problem. And I think one of the problems, I mean, let me tell you a true kind of something from real experience. For many years, for instance, the university I was part of, alone among all the other Palestinian universities, was engaged in cooperation projects with counterpart Israeli universities and institutions. But then, come the Gaza war, the first one, whenever it happened, and I looked around and felt that all my colleagues who were in fact engaged in these dialogue or joint efforts were beginning to feel different about their activities. And discussing the matter with them, I felt all of them were beginning to become withdrawn. And when asked why, they all basically just said one thing. You know, we didn't feel that our counterpart Israeli colleagues showed us any understanding, sympathy, or anything for how we felt about what was happening to children in Gaza. And so, you know, we convened a meeting. I asked them, because they really constituted the critical mass of people at the university who were in favor of communication dialogue, and discussed it, and the decision was in the end that we can't continue, we can't set up anything new. We won't stop anything that's going on, but we can't set up anything new. And we'll come back and think about it in the future. Now, we never came back to think about it or to discuss it. And I think one of the reasons why not is the sense in the Palestinian community, on the Palestinian side, that things have not been getting better, they've been getting worse. Now, I don't want to end my brief introductory words like this negatively. I mean, I realize that there's a lot of goodwill on the Palestinian side. I also realize there's a lot of goodwill on the Israeli side, because I communicate with Israelis at different levels, and I feel and sense the goodwill that exists. And I feel it exists also on the Palestinian side, but it's like, I don't know, it's like you need a broker or something, not somebody that breaks our heads, but you need something to happen, and I'm not sure what that is. I think maybe try to create faith again.
What I hear in your words is that a sense that dialogue is perhaps irrelevant with regard to the process, the diplomatic and political process to create peace. So the question I would like to perhaps explore is, do we still believe, or can we maintain the faith that the dialogue that takes place between individual Israelis and Palestinians, or groups, small groups of Israelis and smaller groups of Palestinians, has any significance beyond just cultivating goodwill?
Yeah. I'm not very good on faith, actually. Yeah, right. I mean, it's true. Sorry, what you said, absolutely true. It's not like the Oslo days and the early days of the dialogue groups. Many of us remember them from personal experience. There was an intoxication. I mean, I remember very clearly what it was like. I hardly knew Palestinians. Suddenly, the end of the 80s, when these dialogue groups began springing up spontaneously in different parts of the city, the horizon opened up, a whole world opened up, and for me it was, these were very dramatic experiences, to spend the night in a Palestinian home, to eat with Palestinian friends, to see the world from their perspective was an amazing thing. Another amazing thing was that we didn't have these experiences before, even though everybody was only a few kilometers away from one another. Of course, it's not like that today. I mean, we've had, this is, soon it'll be 30 years almost since this began, that kind of communication. And a lot of terrible things have happened. I mean, mostly terrible things have happened, in fact. Actually, I wanted to ask Sari, if I may, about this, because Because you said you've been feeling a little despondent. I wanted to know what you do with despair. Because I have a theory of despair of my own, too. But let me... do you feel despair, or is it just despondent, or what is it?
Well, going along with what we heard and saw earlier, talking about Buber, needing to be to express oneself honestly, and not to prevaricate or hide anything. I really, to be frank, can only say honestly that I don't have at the moment. I mean, just looking at things rationally, trying to see things through what I know through my reason and extrapolating into the future, I don't really see very much good happening out there, neither for the Palestinians, but also nor for the Israelis. I don't see the Israelis or the Israeli society doing any better. I think both sides are somehow just losing it. And actually, I think on the Israeli side, there's probably more to be lost than on the Palestinian side, because the Israeli side starts out a bit higher than the Palestinian side. And it is a pity because, you know, because theoretically, there's so much that could be done for both sides if both sides were to work together. And one quick word about dialogue. I think dialogue is necessary in any case. Even in the worst circumstances, you have to keep bridges open. You have to keep bridges open. You have to retain some humanity in this otherwise very gloomy space around us.
Yeah. You know, my friends say that I've long gone beyond despair. Despair is a relatively optimistic, let's call it, situation for me. You know, I'm way beyond that. But I feel a lot of despair. I tell you when I feel it, actually, because you know, weekends I very often go down to South Hebron. I just did tell you a secret. When I get up in the morning, I have to get up early in the morning to take the bus that we have down to South Hebron. I have a kind of skeptical inner voice that says things to me like, why are you doing this? After all, it's completely futile, isn't it? I mean, we're a handful of people. It's true that we've had, you know, on the ground we've had some success, and I can point to actually dozens of cases where we were able to actually, you know, halt the process of dispossession and expulsion and even reverse it sometimes, bringing people back home. We can do that. But nonetheless, it's not changing the political reality. So it looks like, you know, Don Quixote. It looks like a kind of futile gesture. This is an annoying inner voice that comes up in me regularly as I'm on my way to the rendezvous point. Once I actually get there, of course, it disappears. And when I'm down there, being, you know, with real human beings who are mostly glad to see me there, and sometimes I even feel that I can help in some way, and also just being with them is of some significance. So that kind of skeptical voice, the despairing voice, it kind of goes away. But I've learned also to value that voice, because I think that voice is part of also what impels me to act. And that's why, although I agree with you that, I mean, if you look at the situation coldly, I mean, it's getting worse all the time. And it's hard to see. In fact, I don't think that the Israeli left, if what's left of it, probably most of it is in this room now. I don't think the Israeli left has the resources, the internal resources to produce political change. I don't think it does. But I do see things that are hopeful also in terms of, you know, that question of despair. I wanted to say something about civil disobedience. This is a week in which we've had 2 or 3 interesting examples from within Israel. Tomorrow, many of you in this room probably know, tomorrow there's going to be a full-page advertisement in Haaretz signed by some 700 people calling for a boycott of products anything related to the settlements. That's breaking the law, the new law, ever since the Supreme Court ruled on this 2 or 3 weeks ago. I regard this as a very optimistic sign, one might say, you know. There's the report that was released this week by Breaking the Silence. It's not exactly civil disobedience. These are people who are very careful about obeying the law. But the implications of that report as to what happened in Gaza last summer are very far-reaching. The fact that such a report can be published at all in Israel and can set off the kind of controversy that it has, that's an important element. So I have to say that for me, I mean, despair is something that one can actually work with maybe in a positive way. And I think the future lies in civil disobedience within Israel. I can't say about Palestine.
Well, I think, you know, clearly what you're doing is something that's, that you know, asks for recognition. It's very courageous, very committed, and certainly is an example to people, to other people. And I wish there were more and more people doing the same kind of thing that you're doing. There are, but I think it would be great if it does, in fact, develop as a movement, even if only by way of expressing closeness and nearness to those that are suffering or feel they're suffering, to feel that there are people that stand by them, just are standing there, is, I think, greatly appreciated. And I think it is certainly something to do. In other words, one must not give up doing whatever it is one needs to be doing, at least in order to feel good with oneself. If you are at all sensitive to to human beings, to people's rights, you can't just sit back and take it and accept what's happening in your name. That is an infringement on their humanity, on their dignity, on their rights. And so, yes, I understand that. What I'm saying is that one shouldn't expect that from that one could see into a future where politically there's going to be the same kind of solution, that's been out there on the table for the past 20, 30 years. And I think we need to be imaginative once again. I mean, if we can't work our intellect, we should work our imagination to try and look into what possibilities exist out there in the future, and try to work together in order perhaps to bring them about. I am despondent, but you know, I don't give up. I you know, take my work very seriously. I don't go about trying to create a civil disobedience campaign within Israel. It's your responsibility, and on the Palestinian side, although there's talk about something similar, I don't again feel that it's the right kind of situation that can bring it about. But I want to ask you a question. What do you think is required on the Palestinian side, or from the Palestinian side, to make the kind of work that you do gain momentum within Israel?
You know, our dream, so to speak, this is our dream, not your dream perhaps, our dream is some kind of mass, nonviolent resistance against the occupation led by Palestinians, but a kind of movement that we could join if we were to be allowed to do that. It would have to be, you know, you would have to want us to be there. But were such a movement to happen, and I understand the objective, you know, the objective problems. The impediments are enormous. I mean, Israel has created a situation where everything is fragmented. It's almost impossible to get a kind of translocal movement moving inside the occupied territories. Nonetheless, you know, it's happened before. So I mean, it's a dream. This is our dream. Again, it's a dream we'd like to be part of. But yeah.
Actually, I was asking you what you need from the Palestinians, so that you can do your own civil disobedience.
I mean, your own. Yeah. No, but this is a part of what we need, so to speak. But if you mean the kind of things that people say, that matters a lot. Actually, it has to. There's many things that could be said publicly in the press. Actually, some of them are said. I've heard them many times in Arabic, in English, in Hebrew. You know, it's for me nothing new. But Israelis don't usually hear them. The kinds of things that you yourself have said and many others have said, you know. I do India-related things, you know. So I think about Gandhi and Gandhian methods and Gandhian resistance and things like that. And it's been my good fortune to meet various Palestinian, you could call them Gandhian activists, on different levels, some kind of well-known within the community and some on very localized village levels, you know. These are enormously impressive people, and these are voices that need to be heard. They're not always heard. I think, that would matter, perhaps. I don't think it's going to change the political reality here, but it would help us, I think, to have more of such voices.
If you don't object, sorry, and David, we'll welcome some questions from the audience. So we extend the dialogue to you. Does anyone wish to say anything? Question? Yes, please.
Thank you. What I wanted to ask, I do not doubt that both of the speakers, and for example, Professor Schulman, when he goes to visit Arab population, he feels the suffer of the other, and this this means that you are a humanist. But what I'm asking is maybe something similar to what was asked before. How is this relevant to cultivating humanism inside Israel? Because what I'm feeling is not a doubt about your humanism, but is the kind of separation or detachment between left politicians in Israel and just people. Because suffering in Israel is like we are blind to suffering, not only for Palestinian suffering, but also for Israeli suffering. And the question is, how can we bring humanism? And this, what I feel is a bit like, okay, my cousin is willfully blind, but this means I cannot speak with him. I cannot really understand. Well, never mind. This is my question about humanism inside Israel.
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that question. I teach at the university. I never talk politics at the university ever in my classes, and yet occasionally I notice students who turn up at some place like Bilin. You know, it's a kind of victory for me because I feel they've understood something that I didn't say and would not say in a classroom. You know, I don't know how to inculcate humanism. I'm afraid I don't know how to do it, but I do know that my own feeling, my own vision, so to speak, is that there is no future at all for Israel without the Palestinians. We are intimately bound together. There's no meaning, in a way, to our experience here, the experience of the last 100 years, without the presence of the Palestinians. That is our challenge. I don't know how to make my neighbors in the neighborhood where I live, agree with that. I don't know how. I don't know how. But another thing is that I feel it's important to act. That's another thing. I have come to feel over the years that it's very nice to have let's call them humanistic, humane ideals, and to vote for the peace parties and so on, or if there is such a thing. But it doesn't count for very much unless you're prepared to actually take the risk involved of actually going into the territories, doing what you can. Again, civil disobedience. Unless one is prepared to actually act and take the risk and pay the price, then what good is it to have noble ideals, you know? You know, in that sense also, this sort of comes through in an interesting way with relation to Buber, because I asked myself over the last few days towards this evening what Buber would say about that. He was in many ways amazingly prophetic. He saw the danger of a militaristic state, you know. He said, his phrase, in 1919, the end, right after the First World War, he said, you know, that his nightmare was that there would be a nationalistic Jewish state which had, he said, cannons and flags and military decorations, tzalashim. We have a lot of tzalashim.
Please.
Thank you very much. Professor Shulman, you're very clear saying that you represent a minority in the Israeli society and that you don't even know how to convince your neighbors. Professor Nusseibeh, do you feel the same thing about your position in the Palestinian society?
Well, it goes up and down how I feel, because on the one hand, I mean, there's certain things I think that that I'm representative in my views of my society. For instance, certainly with regard to, for instance, a two-state solution. I think, you know, if you put it to the polls or elections or what have you, in spite of everything that we have over there, I think people go for a two-state solution. If they see that it is there, you know, they're not just being asked to, you know, put in a ballot like and not get anything out of it. Now, I have other views, but I don't think necessarily those are representative. I may tell you about them, but I think maybe not.
People in charge saying, just thinking about this in terms of Buber, I'm wondering to what extent the panelists think that in what ways the political process, this emphasis on the peace process, interferes with peace on the ground, peace between people. Is that something that you would think? Is that something we think Buber would think about what has been going on, particularly in the last couple of years?
That's right.
Did that make sense?
You're talking about the peace
Well,
process?
meaning the strictly diplomatic aspects and the focus, almost maybe fetishization of the diplomatic aspects of the process. Has that, in fact, it hindered, quote unquote, real peace, if you might say, if you would use that term?
I mean, you have to remember, I'm not a political commentator. I'm just a village Sanskritist. That's all I do. Once in a while, you know, on the weekends, I'm in the Palestinian territories. I don't really know. I'm not sure that what's called the peace process was any process at all over the last 2 or 3 years. From my point of view, what I see is that the Israeli leadership, elected leadership, does not want to make peace. That's what I see. That's where the thing is most stuck. It's not the only reason that it's stuck, but that's where it's truly most deeply stuck. Were there a will to make peace, then it would unstuck and would become unstuck, I suppose.
So allow me to interpret the question, whether the lack of a genuine peace process inhibits the veracity, the effectiveness, the credibility of your efforts at dialogue.
And let me, if I may, I mean, I get to vote in a different country where there's some tall men who invested a lot of effort into this.
Right.
Political capital is the business. You know, so what should I say to them, my elected representatives, about this whole thing? You know, if I get that opportunity.
Well, you have the advantage of living in a democracy, as do we on this side. We know what people do, you know, in order to make make some kind of impact, that's what I think you should be doing, you know. That is, you should be telling the truth. For example, one of the truths, I'm not saying this is the only truth, but one of the truths is that we have an occupation that's been in place for nearly 50 years. It has to end. It has to end. That should be a message which, you know, I'd be grateful if you were to present it to your congressman and your senator and send a message to the Secretary of State and so on, you know. But actually, Paul's question, I think, just, I mean, you said whether these two different levels, you might say. I think our work is independent of the illusion of this political process. I don't think it has any impact on it.
Any further questions, please?
What, if you can, please help me know, what would or did Buber say about the process of building trust between people?
This is for you.
Unless you want to say something. Yeah.
I trust you to say.
If I just could refer to the Sari's on this notion of faith. Buber in various form and indicated that the Hebrew term for faith is trust. Of course, it's in religious terms, it's grounded in the relationship to the divine, and that should give us the, so to speak, the spiritual energy to seek trust between one another. But of course, trust is very difficult to cultivate. It's a great challenge. Perhaps the point of departure was suggested in the film, is to learn to listen to the other and to signal to the other that you are listening to his and her anguish, pain, and hope. And that is a very, that's perhaps the fundamental challenge to cultivating, nurturing trust.
May I extend my question now?
Certainly.
But she needs the microphone now.
Do the Arabs, I live among the Israelis, so I hope I know a little bit of the answer, but do the Palestinians want to build, or do they have trust in us, the Israelis, in the process? And your face.
Short answer is no. And it's not actually, look, I mean, there were periods, there was a period, I recall the Palestinians, the Palestinian population at large, really feeling that this is it, and we're going to make peace. And that was, you know, with the Madrid talks, the Oslo process, the beginning of all of that. I got the impression at the time, I used to get the impression that the majority were thinking this is it, and things were you know, visibly transforming like magic in the interactions between even soldier and activist. You know, an activist who would be shot at by a soldier if he'd seen him hanging a flag up or writing graffiti on the wall a month or a year before, now actually helping the activist to you know, stretch the Palestinian flag out properly so that it wouldn't trap up into the front of the car and cause an accident. I mean, I've seen in my own eyes really something really incredible, the transformation. And you know, to go back to somebody who was saying on the film something, these were moments of magic that existed then, and I think could exist again. I mean, and this is the good thing about magic, and the good thing about miracles, is that, you know, you look around you and you don't see any signs of them. But then when the right thing happens, there they are. You need to have faith.
Cool. Perhaps just one and two last questions, please.
I would like to address them to Professor Nusseibeh. I have two questions, if I may. One is, you said that you support a two-state solution, but I have a feeling that more and more among Palestinians there is the debate about a one-state solution, and the question is when it will become official. So I wonder what you really personally think, or if you even may say it, maybe you may not yet say what you think about the one-state solution. And the second question is, Professor Schulman spoke about the advertisement which will come out tomorrow about the boycott of the products from Israeli settlement. What is your opinion on BDS, general BDS?
With regard to the two-state, one-state, there's a statement that I heard that by somebody which I have taken to reproducing when asked, which is this: it's a situation at the moment is not like going to the supermarket wanting to buy a two-state solution and the guy in charge of the shop telling you, sorry, we've run out. And so you ask, well, do you have a one-state on the shelves I can pick up? And it's not at all like this. Everybody agrees that today we live in a one-state, what they call a one-state reality. And that's been the case now for several years. And the question is, how do we act within this reality in order to change it, to being better? And I'm not personally a staunch nationalist. And I don't see the state as an end in itself. I see the state, whether Israeli or Palestinian, as a means to an end, a means to a human end, a means to a dignified life, and so on. Now, this is a quick answer to the first question. To the second question, BDS, I'm afraid I can go on talking for the next hour. I don't think the audience wants me to. But the short answer is that I think one has to think about it very, very seriously and think of all the aspects, the positive and the negative, and make sure that whatever it is that one engages in, one does so not out of a sense of an expression of simply venting anger or hurting the other. Anything that is done must be done, I think, if it's political, with a purpose, and the purpose must be good.
Wonderful. Would you like to?
Yeah.
I think with this at least horizon of hope, or at least of
more than faith.
Of faith, we can conclude and thank our.
Thank you.